What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in its sights. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex. That is, if they will appear together anymore. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from the chances of interest rates cuts to the import tariff on macadamia nuts, and of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Oliver Gosden, Managing Director of Real Connections. The company consists of Keep Education, Teach Limited, Teach Tiny, Plan Staff Now, and I Want Supply, and all of them are specialists within the educational recruitment sector. Established in 2003, it has developed a unique range of offerings with the goal of providing clients with a more varied choice of service. Oliver started with the company as a consultant and worked his way up to director. With years of experience within the sector under his belt, we discuss the company, how the market has changed, and what Real Connections has planned going forward. Oliver, welcome. Oliver, welcome.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And I know it's been a while now since Real Connections has been in the review. I thought it might be a great place to start with you letting us know and the listeners what you and the whole team have been up to.
So recently it's been quite an exciting time for the group. We've got a new product coming to market this year, which we're all quite excited about, in the form of Front of Class, which is a online platform for teachers and support staff to gain permanent and support work through. So we're just in the process at the moment of doing the background work on that, really, and then busy resourcing for, like I say, teachers and support staff in the other areas as well as a business.
Excellent, and no doubt there's never probably a quiet time of year for you, really, but that's something I think it sounds very exciting. We'll touch on that later, no doubt. But I thought. And I think what would be exceptionally interesting for the listeners to know, especially those that may be a little bit more unaware that work outside the sector, Oliver, it's becoming increasingly difficult for schools to recruit the right teachers and for those in-demand teachers to find the right placement. How have you been able to provide this service with so much versatility over the years?
I think diversification for ourselves has been a big part for the last 5 or 6 years, where we've had to go from solely supplying supply teachers, i.e. qualified teachers, to both primaries and secondary schools, to diversifying into the more support staff side of things as well. There's a greater need out there for special educational needs development and also for general teaching assistants, nursery nurses, and also with the increase in cover supervisors, which are unqualified teachers taking a lot of classes, which I think there was a lot of fight within the sector to begin with. Obviously, a lot of budget constraints and that sort of thing kind of moved schools and academies towards that way of thinking. And we've had to obviously change with the times a little bit. So that is making it slightly harder for supply teachers to find day-to-day work. However, I think if you're working closely with the clients that you have and that sort of thing, there's a good market there already. There's still obviously a shortage of qualified teachers coming through into the sector as well, which obviously I'm sure everybody's aware of with the national press and that sort of thing. And I think a lot can be done to try and rectify rectify that shortcoming by certain people paying more attention to what schools actually need and what they're really striving for at the moment as well.
Absolutely. And you, of course, Oliver, work in Real Connections, work across the entire area of the sector. So you really are the people that know what's going on. But I think to pick up on something you've just said there, Oliver, I think it would be interesting to know, since Real Connections was established now, or back in 2003, you say, times have changed. And what would you point out to be, Oliver, the main changes in the sector, and how have you been able to adapt to them as you've moved forward?
Yeah, like I say, I think a lot of it was down to when I originally started with the group 15 years ago. And we were dealing, like I say, solely really with qualified teachers. We didn't deal with the SEN side of things. We didn't deal with teaching assistants, support staff, or anything like that. It was purely 100% teachers, and very much on the day-to-day side of things, sickness cover, that sort of thing. I think over the years, like I say, budgets have been hit really hard by schools. And they've had to start working more towards being a bit more business orientated in terms of their expenditure. And unfortunately, staffing is one of the largest costs. I think figures I heard years ago was something like 90% of a school's budget goes to staffing costs. And that's a huge amount of money for each school to be spending out. And I think they've had to try and work with agencies to try and bring that cost down, which they have done. I mean, we're actually charging less now than we were 10 years ago. So we've had to I think, and this is where there's a common misconception that agencies are earning a huge amount of money from everyone and all this sort of thing, and that's not actually the case anymore. A lot of the times with the introduction of agency worker rights, AWR, that sort of thing, which is obviously prolific within all of recruitment, with that coming into effect within teaching as well, it's forced agencies to sometimes pay slightly higher rates, but obviously those costs are then passed on to schools. But what you very often find is that the part in the middle, which is our little bit of profit and that sort of thing, does tend to get squeezed. And there's greater competition with the sector itself, attracting an awful lot of other recruitment agencies that have maybe been struggling within their sectors. So looking at things like industrial, commercial, those sort of agencies that have then decided to go into the education because of it being government funded and that sort of thing. Obviously, competition going up, then price is one of the things that seems to catch people's eye very quickly. Obviously, if we can try and stay our course, which we've tried to do with the level of service and going down that side of things, rather than price being the main contributor to actually getting business, I think that's how we've been able to stay successful for as long as we have.
Without a doubt. And as you've already mentioned as well, of course, your ability, I think, over there at Real Connections to diversify within yourselves has become a great strength and a great, obviously, bonus to and for clients. And maybe this is, and again, another sign of the times.
We hope so.
Yes, fingers crossed. But this is another sign of the times, perhaps. But of course, you've developed, in fact, your own online platform, and that's something that maybe 15 years ago would have been thought of something, it is anyway an exceptionally ambitious program. But what was the decision behind that? How's it worked out, and what were the challenges you had when formulating it?
Great question. I think if we'd known what we know now when you're going into this sort of endeavour, we would have probably done it slightly differently. Obviously, hindsight's always fantastic to have, isn't it? But some of the challenges I think we found was the actual software side of things, the development side, was so much more long-winded than we were expecting. And I think we come from a sales background and the marketing and that sort of thing within the group. And very often you come up with an idea, you think about it, you have a meeting, you put it into action, and then within a couple of weeks it's out there and it's all going and it's fantastic. With when you're developing software,
yes.
and that's like it's so much longer, and I know myself and other directors and that sort of thing have had to try and rein in a little bit our expectations, because it is very. This has been in process now for the last 2 years, and the reason we started doing it is because we saw the marketplace changing. We realised that there are more and more people now with smart technology and speed. I mean, we all want everything straight away now. I mean, Amazon's going to be having drones soon, and and all this sort of thing, and we want everything here and now. So, in order to try and keep up with that desire and that want from our potential clients, we've had to go into this side of the market, which is both exciting but terribly nerve-wracking, because it means going against the grain a little bit of our commitment to high levels of service. So where we would like to speak to people over the phone and maybe speak to them face to face and that sort of thing, using mobile technology and software kind of eliminates that aspect of it, which, like I say, I think for some clients it will really appeal to them, and certainly on the permanent side of the market, where the speed of which they want agencies to come back to them and that sort of thing, by having that search criteria, they'll be able to actually search their own teachers effectively without having to rely on other intermediaries to act quickly and come back as soon as possible. But like I say, hopefully it's going to be exciting for a lot of clients, and for those that it isn't, well, then we've got the other side of the business that can hopefully take care of their needs as well.
Absolutely. Your ability to cater to that variety has, as you said, has been key. Although, I think it was just the other day over New Year's, they said the average age these days of a teacher in the country is in fact 39. So it seems to be getting younger and younger. So I think the more, it might be all Greek to some of us, but I think that some people are so technologically savvy now. If you're being born in the 80s at this point, it's going to be the new reality, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, with NQTs coming through and that sort of thing, there is a definite correlation between software and technology being utilised within the sector than, say, like you say, 10, 15 years ago, where maybe that wasn't necessarily so prolific. There are, obviously, we've had to take that into account as well.
Now, with that in mind, Oliver, and perhaps if I get to sort of take a step back here and look more broadly, what would you identify as, especially looking at the sector here, at the sort of the major medium-term challenges you can see on the horizon?
Financial status aside, with obviously school budgets that we've touched on already, I think that the driving of recruitment is really needed within the sector. So I think it would be worthwhile for MPs and local government and that sort of thing to truly try and work with schools to see where those shortcomings are, and also to speak to newly qualified teachers and find out exactly what's actually attracting them into the sector and how we can try and boost those numbers, because the statistics that I hear through the grapevine and that sort of thing is that the figures are lower than they need to be, especially given the number of children either coming into the country or that are naturally being created within the country is increasing every year. School places are going to become obviously harder and harder, hence why you're getting larger and larger schools. I mean, I remember being in a primary school and there was 300 children and the head teacher knew all their names, whereas now there's these multi-sites and that sort of thing where they're so vast that in order to actually staff those schools, you're going to need the best part of 90 odd teachers, which that's a huge number for one location to have. And that's just qualified teachers. That's not even including support staff. So, you're starting to look at those sort of numbers, and actually the newly qualified teachers coming in need to be prepared for what they're letting themselves in for almost. And there's this theory that, the sunshine is always greener and the grass is greener and that sort of thing. But preparing NQTs for that first 2-3 years, where it is, despite common misconceptions by the general public, it is exceptionally hard work. And, the average teacher in this country is working something like 55, 60 hours a week, which, okay, school time, 25, 30 hours, but it's all the hard work that goes in behind the scenes that no one really sees except if you're in the profession. And I think if we can do something to try and bring the profession back up to where it was maybe 25, 30 years ago, where it was so well respected. If people were proud to teach, not to say that they're not proud now, but there needs to be more from the general public of understanding that actually, you know what, teachers work really, really hard, and they do a fantastic job with the resources they're given. And then, we're trusting. I've got a 5-year-old myself, and I entrust her to the school that she's placed at and the teachers that are there. And that's it's a big responsibility for them to take.
It really is, and you've touched on an awful lot there, Oliver. And I think you were very brave actually to try and pretend there perhaps. We can separate the issue of getting the right teachers and retaining the right teachers and the issue of funding, because, of course, when push comes to shove, they are difficult to separate. Now, I know that we're speaking, obviously, in a brand new calendar year after a general election. I think a lot of people are hoping that however you voted in the general election, we do now have a government that can perhaps focus on other things other than just Brexit, because there's a great feeling in the country that it sucked the oxygen out of the room and no one's been talking about, for example, education policy. And I know that it will be exceptionally interesting to hold the government to account in terms of their promises in the manifesto. I know that when it comes to this, they've promised to raise teachers' starting salaries to £30,000, which makes it much more competitive with other graduate jobs. And more than that, of course, I think it was 14 billion pounds funding for schools over the next 10 years. How do you hope? And I mean, let's hope you do hope. But Oliver, how do you view those promises in helping out the sector going forward?
Well, I mean, they're promises, aren't they? So I think, they sound fantastic. And in all honesty, Jonathan, if they come to light, that will be the proof is in the pudding, isn't it?
I'll tell you what,
the starting salary. Sorry, go on.
I'll put you on the spot then, Oliver. And let's say you're Secretary of State for the afternoon. You had a magic wand. You've got a big majority in Parliament. What would you do straight off the bat, you think, that could really help schools, teachers in the sector?
The starting salary is definitely up there, because I think, like you've already mentioned, there is a huge difference between the starting salary for a teacher. I think it's currently around £22,500, £23,000, depending on where in the country you start. And the average graduate coming out, obviously already owing, the best part of £36,000 to £40,000, having gone through the training for it, and then obviously taking on the added responsibility and pressure of work-life balance the teacher has, to only receive less than what you could earn maybe going into, a standard startup retail job and that sort of thing. It just seems a little bit wrong to me. That's, I think that's fundamental. And I think a lot of teachers would understand that. Whether the taxpayers do, I don't know. It's one of those things, isn't it, that we all want that, but the minute we're all asked to pay for it, then it suddenly becomes a bit of a different conversation. But in order for our children and the future generation to be educated properly, we are going to have to attract the best candidates possible. And in order to do that, we have to pay them. And, it's one of those things, isn't it, that if you look at the number of teachers within the profession who are leaving within the first 3 years because of the pressures and the work-life balance, and that it wasn't quite what they were expecting it to be, those numbers are actually quite high. And I think if we were to attract people with the right salary, that would go some way. But like I say, also preparing them a little bit more. So there's talk of speeding up the process in terms of the qualification, the PGCE, which I think would be detrimental, dare I say it, to the sector. I can see the purpose of it. It's great. We need teachers now. But, the old saying of, buy cheap, buy twice. There's no point in training up thousands upon thousands of people who actually shouldn't necessarily be the ideal fit for the sector. And I think there's a very fine balance to be had between paying the right people and just paying everybody. Paying is one thing I would definitely look at, because I think if you can attract people into it, but then those people you're attracting in, actually put them through a little bit more of a pace when it comes to the PGCE and the placements and that sort of thing, and really make sure that they are fully committed. And then also try and, if we can, to try and prevent those people taking those skills that we pay for abroad straight away, and then we lose the ability to have those in our schools in this country.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of nails you hit on the head there, Oliver. Actually, and there's certainly, I think, as other nations do, there is a guarantee that if after you've qualified to be a teacher and you stay in the country, then your loans will be taken care of. And I think it comes back, though, doesn't it, as you've already mentioned, Oliver, as to a more of a fundamental societal shift in how much the teaching profession has respect is there is for the teaching profession.
Yeah, and I think if we were to elevate the pay and the conditions and that sort of thing of the sector, I think the general public would see that as a more respected profession, and hopefully then attract more people to go into it. I mean, you used to have children of the previous generation, they grew up wanting to teach, and as much as there are those star people out there at the moment, which obviously is a company we try and attract just as much as the schools. It would be great to have more of those. And I think if we can, it's about investing for the future, isn't it? And I know the government is committed. And any government, we're not just talking about the current one. Any government should be committed to the future generation. We should be trying to focus our attention on training and education, driving that up, and with that comes innovation from the next generation, and that's really quite paramount, really, to stay ahead of the game and keep Great Britain where we want to be.
Absolutely, especially given the unpredictable nature of the next few years the country has. It's going to be so key, and it will be exceptionally interesting to see what happens on that front. Now, Oliver, I'm conscious of the time. In fact, we could talk about this all day. We shouldn't. You've already mentioned it. In fact, your exciting new program, I think, Front of Line. What are the plans for the future for Real Connections of the next 12 months or so?
Well, I think this year is going to be really focusing down on this product that we're now releasing, the front of class, and also we've got another system called I Want Supply, which is a very similar but maybe slightly different version of the same. So we've got these two products that we're going to be trying to sell out, and obviously we've got natural growth and that sort of thing that we're trying to work on as well within the other branches. Quite big, exciting plans actually within the next 12 months. I think, like for any company, especially a privatised company like ourselves, obviously we want that natural growth and whatnot, but it'll be interesting to see what comes about from the government and what sort of help and we can get from them.
Well, as things develop, Oliver, and as you launch those products, I hope we can sit down again together and chat in the coming months.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. It'd be great to touch base and let people know how we're getting on, but also just to find out, how the lay of the land goes. Once, like you say, once that B word's hopefully sorted, we can all move on, can't we?
Speak for the nation. Oliver, thank you very much for joining us today.
No problem at all. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Oliver, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Real Connections are continuing to raise standards. I look forward to speaking to Oliver again soon. If you haven't heard it before, though, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. indeed before the days we were in the common market. But of course, maybe for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshirean, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. And certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up. And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know, is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the shadow front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxist to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia, and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara.
And which
I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunt was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road, Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment you think in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down for being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and war-bane. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. And I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well. It's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that. Or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are. And
I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine actually that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the red line to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.